Are you worried about the rising cost of energy? Did you know that the sun can help you cut your electricity bills by more than half? Stay with me to see if it's time for you to go solar. When you start to research the topic of solar power, you quickly find there's a lot to learn, and the deeper you get into that learning, the more complicated it seems to get. My aim with this channel is to save you a lot of time as you learn about solar. Now, because I live in the UK, my channel will inevitably have a UK focus, but the principles of solar are applicable all over the world, no matter where you live, so you should hopefully still get a lot of value. Okay, let's get started. There's no escaping it. In most parts of the world, the cost of energy is rising, and it's rising rapidly. Some say that the recent price rises are temporary, connected to world events, but many people think those prices are here to stay. Looking at the UK market, the cost of electricity, although relatively flat the last few years, averaging about £1,000 a year for a typical household, has essentially doubled in the last year, and it's expected to rise again significantly in the next 6 months. The hard truth is that many will find it increasingly difficult to pay for their energy bills. Let's have a look at some real energy numbers then. What you see here is a chart showing typical annual energy consumption in the UK in kilowatt hours based on property type. You can see that for a semi-detached house, bungalow and detached house, the consumption is roughly the same. And so for our calculations going forward, we will use an annual consumption value of 4,200 kilowatt hours. Worth remembering this number as we'll come back to it shortly. Cutting down on the amount of energy we use is of course an obvious way to reduce those bills, but our dependence on energy these days mean that those cuts can only ever go so far. There is, however, another way to reduce your energy bills and reduce them dramatically, but this way you will require two things. First, you will have to be prepared to make a sizable upfront financial investment, and one that will only see a payback in several years' time. And second, you'll need a large fusion reactor. Now, although I cannot help you with the money you'll need for the investment, the good news is that you don't need to buy or build a fusion reactor, because there's one already available for free, and it is, of course, this. The sun is something that we pretty much take for granted every day, and although we may never have considered this before, it is perhaps the best possible way for us to individually manage our energy costs. On a clear day with no cloud, the sun's radiation on the Earth's surface near the equator is roughly 1 kilowatt per square metre. So all we need to do is capture some of that energy and use it for ourselves. And to do that, we'll need some solar panels. You don't need to walk too far around your neighbourhood to see houses with solar panels installed on the roofs. In the UK today, there are 1 million homes with solar installations. So if you're thinking about going solar, you're not alone. Let's have a look at what a solar panel does in a bit more detail then. Solar panels come in various sizes, but a typical size might be around 1.7 metres by 1.1 metres, and they weigh about 20 kilograms each. Looking closely at a panel, you'll see they comprise a number of solar cells. On this panel there are 60. These cells are able to convert sunlight into electricity. It should be noted though that today's solar cells are only about 20% efficient, although the technology is improving all the time. Nevertheless, a panel of this size can generate approximately 400 watts of power in the right conditions. A typical solar installation like this in central England, comprising of say 16 400 watt panels, might generate up to 6 kilowatts in peak conditions. And by peak conditions, this would mean a south-facing roof on a clear day with the sun at the highest point in the sky. An array of this size should be capable of generating around 5,800 kilowatts of energy every year. This is a good point to talk a little bit about the difference between kilowatt hours and kilowatts. One is energy and the other is power. Scientists defined energy as the capacity to do work. For example, boiling a litre of water requires a certain amount of energy. Power, on the other hand, is the rate of doing that work. A typical kettle might take 3 minutes to boil a litre of water, but a higher powered kettle will boil that water faster. Power is measured in watts or kilowatts, whilst energy is measured in kilowatt hours. Now earlier we saw in our example that a 6 kilowatt solar array can generate 5,800 kilowatt hours of electricity per year. If we only need 4,200 kilowatt hours per year, it looks like our 16 panel array is way more than enough for our needs. But actually it's a little more complicated than that. And to see why, we need to look in more depth at how solar is generated throughout the year. What you're seeing here is the distribution of that 5,800 kilowatt hour solar generation across each month of the year. It's perhaps not surprising that there is a higher level of solar generation during the summer months and less in winter. If we plot a line showing our 4,200 kilowatt hours consumption on a monthly basis, you can see that for 9 months of the year we easily cover that consumption, perhaps in February only just. So you might think that leaves us with just a small problem over covering January, November and December. But actually things are a little more complicated still. And to see why, we need to look at the projected consumption on a daily basis. This chart then shows what electricity consumption might look like throughout the day for a typical home in the UK. In the morning when everyone is waking up, there is a fair bit of consumption with cooking and electric showers, etc. This slows down towards lunchtime and people might leave the house, but then it increases sharply again in the evening when there is more cooking being done and major appliances such as dishwashers being used. Then, during the night, electricity consumption falls right back. Notice that it never goes to zero. There is always a minimum level of consumption called a base load or phantom load, and it's there 24 hours a day. It's certainly worth investigating what devices are using that electricity, as it quickly adds up over the days, weeks and months, and I'll show you how to do that in a future video. For now though, let's add to this chart what solar generation might look like on a bright summer's day. You can see that for most of the day, solar generation easily covers our requirement, which is great, but there are times when there is no solar to cover our requirement, like in the evening, and times when there is way more solar generation than we need, like at lunchtime. If only we could move that excess sunshine in the morning to earlier in the day, and do the same for the excess sunshine in the afternoon to the evening, that would solve our problem. Of course, the sun won't be that accommodating, but the good news is that we can move that energy ourselves using batteries. More on this later. Okay, thanks for staying with me so far. Shall we get a little deeper into solar then? Let's see how the management of electricity would work in reality once you've made your investment into solar. So what you can see here is the house on the right and the electricity coming in from the national grid on the left. And we've got some solar panels installed. To keep the numbers easier, let's assume that the house will require 3 kilowatts of power continuously. Now in a real environment that will change all the time, but I think it will just help us explain what's going on. So in the morning the sun starts to shine and the solar panels will generate some power, in this case 2 kilowatts. Now normally we'd have 3 kilowatts coming from the grid, but because the solar panels are generating 2 kilowatts, we only require 1 kilowatt coming from the grid, so already we're saving some money. The sun will get brighter during the morning, so now we're generating 3 kilowatts, and that is meeting all of the requirement for the house, and therefore we don't need any power to come from the grid. So now we're fully self-sufficient. And then at the height of the day, so around lunchtime and into the afternoon, we're generating even more power now, 4 kilowatts. Of course the house only requires 3 kilowatts, so what's going to happen with that extra kilowatt? Well actually what we're going to do here is export it back to the grid, and hopefully we can get paid some money for this. Now, it's not as lucrative as you might think. You won't get paid the same price that you pay for that kilowatt, but you will get some compensation for it. Ideally, what we want to do is limit the amount of energy that we export back to the grid. So let's look at ways that we can do that. If you have a hot water cylinder in the house, normally that might be powered by gas, but you'll probably find there is an immersion heater on it that allows the water to be heated by electricity. So what we can do here is buy a special controller, so rather than us manually choosing whether to heat the water by electricity, we'll allow this controller to do that for us. Now the controller has 2 what we call CT clamps, which are effectively clamps that go round the cabling of the solar panels and also the cabling into the house. so that it can actually measure what power the solar panels are generating and what power the house requires. And in the case where there is more power being generated by the solar panels, it can then use electricity to power the water heater instead of gas. So in this instance, we're now drawing 1 kilowatt for the water heater, so that's now 4 kilowatts coming into the house, which exactly matches the power coming in from the solar panels. And because it matches that, we're no longer exporting any energy back to the grid. Now at some point, the water cylinder is going to reach temperature, and at this point we no longer need to heat it any further. So the power to the house drops back to 3 kilowatts, and of course we're going to have to export 1 kilowatt back out to the grid. So what else can we do? Well, if you have an electric vehicle, we can essentially do the same thing, but this time charge the electric vehicle with that extra power. It doesn't have to be an electric vehicle. It could be, for example, a hot tub. The process is the same. It does require a controller, and that controller, if it's the same manufacturer as the controller for your water cylinder, we don't need any additional CT clamps to monitor the power. So here we are charging the electric vehicle or the hot tub with 1 kilowatt of power. So that's 4 kilowatts coming into the house, and again we match the power coming in from the solar panels, and because of that we don't need to export anything back to the grid. Let's look at a more complicated scenario now where we have solar and battery installed in the house. And we'll start from the situation that we had before, where we're exporting 1 kilowatt back to the grid. With the battery now, we no longer need to export that energy. We can feed it directly into the battery and then charge the battery over time. At some point later, the sun will not be generating as much power as it did, let's say dropping to 2 kilowatts. Our house still requires 3 kilowatts, but at this point the battery supplies the extra kilowatt required, so we don't need to draw energy from the grid. Later still, when there is no sun, so we have no power coming in from the panels, the battery steps up and supplies the full 3 kilowatts that the house needs. Of course, the battery can only do that for so long, as eventually it will run out of power, but at that point the grid can then step back in to supply the needs of the house. There are a couple of other ways that we can use the battery to save money. Let's have a look at those now. If you remember this graph from earlier, there were 3 months of the year where solar was not sufficient to supply our needs. So what do we do here? Well, if you're on an appropriate electricity tariff, you can buy energy cheap during the night. Here's an example: between 0:30 hours in the morning and 4:30, we can actually charge our battery with cheap energy. Some tariffs have variable pricing, and if your setup is clever enough, it can actually monitor this pricing, and when the price of electricity falls below a certain value, then the system can be programmed to charge the battery at that time. Hopefully this has been useful in showing you just how the solar system works in practice inside your house. Earlier we talked about the upfront financial investment required to go solar. But how much of that investment is required? Well, it depends on a number of factors, including your own annual electricity consumption, how much roof space you have, what direction it points, and whether you want a battery or not. As a ballpark figure, you're looking at a typical investment of somewhere between 5 and 15k. In later videos, we'll look in more detail at your own particular situation so that you can get a better feel for the investment required. The next question is, how long will it take for you to get a return on that investment? Current estimates, again based on a number of factors, including the latest energy price rises, point to you getting your money back in 5 to 8 years, with everything after that being pure cost savings. Thanks for joining me today. I hope that I've been able to demonstrate that now could be the right time for you to go solar. Not only will the right solar setup in your home cut your electricity bills by more than half, but at the same time you'll be drastically reducing your carbon footprint. Every kilowatt hour of electricity you generate yourself is a kilowatt hour you don't need to buy from the grid, which may have been produced using fossil fuels. Additionally, if you are in a position to invest in solar, what you're doing in the longer term is creating an environment in your country that will ultimately benefit everyone in the country, something we'll talk about in a later video. In essence, you'll become an integral part of your country's renewable energy infrastructure. Next time we'll cover how to go about getting solar, what equipment you'll require, and how you can get peace of mind when buying your solar setup. Until then, please subscribe to my channel to see videos as soon as they come out. Can I ask you also to share a link to this video to any of your friends or family who might be interested in going solar as well? And finally, if you click like on this video, the YouTube algorithm will give it a wider circulation so that more people can benefit. Thanks very much for your support.